We began a new unit in class today, looking at cellular energy, and we started by going over again the characteristics of all living things, a couple things we've already covered. So remember that all living things maintain homeostasis. And this is just that balance of internal conditions so that they can stay alive. And we discussed that when we talked about cell transport as well as when we talked about biochemistry and enzyme reactions. And then all living things are made up of one or more cells. And so we discussed that when we talked about the last two units as well. This unit, we are going to focus on the fact that all living things obtain and use energy. And they do this in different ways. Most organisms use energy exactly the same way. It's the obtaining that tends to be different. And so we have to separate the organisms into the type of cells that they have. So we begin by talking about a plant cell, because plant cells obtain their energy by doing photosynthesis and then use their energy the same way that animal cells do. And we know this is a plant cell because it has a square shape, which means it has a cell wall. And we also know it is a plant cell because it has chloroplasts. So let's go ahead and draw and label our chloroplasts. Oops. And your chloroplast is a type of plastid. In this case, it's a green one that absorbs sunlight. And then you also have a mitochondria. And when it's by itself, we say it is a mitochondrion. So these are the two organelles inside a cell that actually help you, or help a plant cell, obtain and use energy. So a review from elementary, a review from middle school is that plants do photosynthesis and they require a couple of things. The first thing that they require is CO2, and they also require water. And so those things travel into the chloroplast. Now, we can't just have CO2 and water, we need an energy source. And of course, plants use the ultimate energy source, which is the sun. Oop, I can't spell, obviously. So that sunlight strikes the chloroplast, a particular part of it, and in the presence of CO2 and H2O, and those things then get rearranged into sugar, which usually takes the form of glucose. It can take other forms, but in general, plants make more glucose than anything else. Glucose and then a byproduct of oxygen, and those things come out of the chloroplast. Now, in order to harvest the energy within the sugar, which was the point to doing photosynthesis, in order to actually harvest the energy there and turn it into energy that the cell can use, it has to use the mitochondria. So both the oxygen and the sugar go into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria rearranges them and produces energy in the form of ATP. So you get this great energy molecule, it comes right out of the mitochondrion, and then its byproducts, which is the matter that's left over, is carbon dioxide and water. And this is why we call this the circle of life, because both the chloroplast and the mitochondria depend on each other for their products and reactants. And also, it helps to convert the first energy source, which is the sun, into the ultimate energy source of ATP. One of the major differences between a plant and an animal cell, again, is the fact that animal cells don't have chloroplast, so they cannot actually obtain their energy by doing photosynthesis. They must consume it. So the sugar and the oxygen come in from outside the cell and go into the mitochondria. You get the same results. Remember that the whole point to that was the ATP, which is great energy for the cell. It powers everything from the cell membrane, pumping things against the concentration gradient, to being able to break things down or build things up. Whatever requires energy is going to use ATP. And then, of course, out at the end comes CO2, which most animals breathe out, as well as water, which we also breathe some of that out. So there's the difference between plants and animals. So essentially what's happening inside the cell is some form of chemistry. You either have photosynthesis, which is right up here, or you have cellular respiration, which is down here, and these can be represented by chemical equations, just like you learned about in previous science classes. So up here for photosynthesis, we have CO2 and water in the presence of light energy. Remember, this only works in a chloroplast. Will produce then sugar and oxygen. And down here for cellular respiration, you start with the sugar and the oxygen, and then through the process, you get out energy in the form of ATP, as well as carbon dioxide and water. Now, just as a reminder, for those of you who may not have been in SSI last year, there's some vocabulary that goes along with chemical equations. The first is the term reactant. So reactants are the parts that you start with for the chemical equation. In this case, for photosynthesis, it's carbon dioxide and water, and for cellular respiration, it's sugar and oxygen. And then the last one that you have is the products. This is what's produced in the reaction, and so in the case of photosynthesis, you have sugar and oxygen, and in the case of cellular respiration, you have carbon dioxide and water. And the whole point to these is both to convert the one form of energy into the other form of energy. And I want you also to notice that the products of one are the reactants of the other. So they both depend upon each other in order to work.